I want to get to goal setting and objectives, right? Because I think goal setting and objectives are really important. I think too often, I've been doing this 12, 13 years. Wow. I feel like what's so important about it is I've had all these conversations over time. When you ask people for goals and objectives, they a lot of times they're really not prepared with them. They're already in the process of wanting to talk about the booth and this and that, but like they don't have
That's
goals.
the fun stuff.
Yeah, like they don't have objectives. And I'm like, well, first of all, you need these, in my opinion, to do the booth design, to do the engagement design, all those things like that. So tell me about goal setting, objectives, how you've done it, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, obviously, I think it's very important. Like I said earlier, like I think aligning those internal stakeholders so that everyone's understanding what those objectives are is really key and important. I think a lot of it is just having
Do you
working
get them?
sessions
Sorry,
with
do you
those.
get them from multiple stakeholders? Do you feel like,
Yeah,
meaning like where people are
absolutely.
coming and saying, like, because I feel like you start going to your stakeholders and they're like, I need this, this, and this. I need this, this, this. I need this, this, and this. So are
Yeah.
you kind of deciphering which
Well,
ones? Are you kind of curating it?
I think it's understanding who your main stakeholders are. Like think of it like you always got someone from sales, you always have someone from a product side, you'll probably always have someone from any other. I'm trying to think of like, like a demand gen
Marketing
side might
leadership,
have, yeah, marketing leadership,
your
like those
CFO
those are like
sometimes. Yeah.
your,
Yep.
yeah, like those stakeholders, like, and I'm not saying like if you have like 20 stakeholders, don't like invite all 20 of them to a session. Like you're gonna
You'll never
that's
get out.
asking for,
You'll
you'll
never get
never get
out
out
alive. Yeah.
alive,
Yeah.
like I think it's identifying like who your key stakeholders are. And a process of what I do is like I'll kind of, if I have an idea, you have like I'll kind of filter it out to a couple of folks and I'm like, what do you think of this, and then tweak it as I
Yeah.
go, to kind of get to that end game. Or it would be like, okay, let's have like a working session with these core, you know five or
Yeah.
six, like, not too many voices in a room
Yeah.
of, but the key stakeholders in there. And you're like, okay, what are your goals? What are your goals? And we just do a working session through like the visions, the values, the obstacles, the metrics, and the methods. And I think through that, then it turns into like, okay, like break out again. And it's like a constant moving, it's not final. Like your objectives can change, as I said, like it's remaining flexible. But I think having that locked down together from all your stakeholders is important, because the person that's running sales is not going to be aligned to what product is trying to tell you. Like you need to make sure that they're seeing eye to eye.
Yeah.
So when you're going to go and start making decisions for your booth, you're not, it just makes it easier when everyone's aligned, right? Versus like, otherwise you're going to try and sit there and please everybody and
Yeah.
you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to be able to make decisions because you don't know who has the final
Mm.
say.
I think with making decisions, right? Like when you have the goals and then you have objectives. Objectives to me are really like what are the motions and activities that you're trying to do and hit to create those goals for, for with happening is like too many people put the cart ahead of the horse, right? So when we're talking booth design, when we're talking the overall approach, when we're talking offsite activations, when we're talking like engagement and the motions that we want people to go through, pre-show mark, like all these things to me, they have to feed into the goals. So it's
Yeah.
like I feel like I could talk goals and purpose and things all day, but it's like my overarching thought on it is like, okay, pull me down the line into a different conversation and I'm going to stop you and I'm going to say, well, tell me the goals, because if these ideas don't tie back to the goals, I think they're bullshit. Like, I think they're just some idea that you're like, oh, yeah, let's do this. And like, well, does it tie back to what you're trying to accomplish? They should be your
They should.
foundation guide. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they should always be cohesive, right? Like
Yep.
it goes back to exactly what you're saying. Like everything that you're doing, it's all going back to that touch point that's going to be live, which is, let's say it's the booth or it's the attendance at the show. And if you have all your stakeholders kind of like all over the place like this, no one's going to walk away feeling like they reached success, right? Like, so I think it's very, very important, like to have a very clear vision. And it's exactly that. Like from like a vendor standpoint or from a decision standpoint, if something's being done that doesn't make sense back to that V2 mom, go back to it and say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't align. Are we tweaking this? Because this is an evergreen document. We can change this up until the day before if we wanted, but
Mhm.
it's making sure that you have this set so this looks like success.
I think it also lets you, like you're saying, it lets you kind of benchmark backwards. Like once
Totally.
everything's done, you're going back and like, did we? Because if you don't have them, and you go forward, because we're talking about what? We're talking about having purpose, having goals. We're talking about what does success look like? Well, if you don't have these things written out and then you get down the line and people are like, oh, that show sucked. Oh, yeah, we don't have leads. We're like, well, did we want those leads? Or is this what we were here
Exactly.
for? So like, it just disrupts the whole thing when you don't have that stuff lined up. You can go back, you can make adjustments.
Yeah.
You can say like, we came here for this. It didn't happen, but
Yeah.
this is what happened. Is this worth our while? And now you start talking
Yeah.
about what next year looks like.
Exactly. And I think a lot of that, it goes back to like that piece of the follow up to the customers is important, but that
Mm,
piece of the follow up to your internal stakeholders is important too.
yes.
Hey, we just wrapped up at blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
This is what our outcomes were. And by the way, if you have any feedback, put them in this document for me and like, let's talk about it. So when we're going and doing this again, if we're doing this again, we have a starting point for next year of what we need to build off of.
How important? So I think it's interesting you said that on the after side. How important is it, do you think, to relay what happened, whether it's sort of like quantitatively with actual data or qualitatively with like facts, with like, your gut things? How important is it to relay it back to stakeholders immediately for for the idea of like what happens next at the event and people knowing what's going on? I mean, how seems important.
I mean, it's very critical, right? Like if you don't, I think it goes back to like understanding a lot of like what the audience of your podcast is like you got to be able to toot your own horn, right? Like
Mm.
this was successful. This was a lot of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears that went into this activation. If you're not tooting your own horn, like, and you're waiting around for someone else to do it, you might be waiting around for a really long time. I think it's sharing those results in a
Mhm.
in a timely fashion. I would say probably within a week of the end of the show, or once you're able to get those like, the data that you want to share out, the metrics that you want to share out, you're able to show it, and then also look at it from like last year. Like, did you do better this year compared to last year? What were key learnings that you may have had? Like sharing that up front, I think again will set you aside too. I think we're not perfect, right? Like no one is perfect. So it's again, better, better, never best. How do you improve it each time around? And I think a part of that is also just being open to feedback on, hey, like this could have been better from constructive feedback
Mhm.
on this could have
Yeah.
been better from this angle, and here's why. So capturing all of that so you have a starting point for the next person or like the next year, I think is really important.
And I asked about that because I feel like I haven't heard that a ton from people about the follow up. So, okay, so you've asked for stakeholders' time to develop goals and objectives and purpose and to get them on the same page leading into this. Then all this happens. I think
Mm-hmm.
you owe it to go back to be able to
Yeah.
say, hey, look, this is what we wanted to accomplish. I won't have all the results for 6 months or this, it'll curate over time, but here's all the positives that happen. Here's maybe the things I'm worried about. And now you're just putting together this little report or this little idea to basically say, hey, like, we put a bunch of work into this. Here's where we're at. Here's what went well. Here are the, what's a good term for it? Positive signals, right? That
Yeah.
people want to be able to see. Now I feel like that's traction for the event team and stakeholders. Now, next time you ask a stakeholder to sit and talk about goals, initiatives, objectives, what do you want out of this? They're not going to be like, oh man, she's just burning my time here, right? They're going to be like, no,
Yeah.
let's do it. Let's do it.
Exactly. I think it's keeping that conversation going, right? Like it's just like networking, right? Like you don't want to like not talk to somebody for a year and then just suddenly pop up and be like, hey,
Hey, here
when
I
you need
am.
something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it's keeping it lukewarm and keeping that conversation going because like the chances are you're probably going to work with them again. The chances are that like, you might have to ask for more budget, and
Yeah.
if you're transparent about how the success of the event went from the get-go, you're going to get your buy-in for the next time is going to be so much easier.